Welcome back, everyone. This is Dr. Gallenstein, and today we are going to look at the other kind of market power. In the last lecture, we talked about monopolies, and today we're going to talk about monopsony, or monopsonies, okay? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's jump right in. Monopsonies are a kind of market power, okay? So they're a kind of market power in which there is only one buyer of a good. So monopsony is where there's only one buyer of a good. So remember, a monopoly was when there was one producer. Now a monopsony is when there's only one buyer. Okay, so again, just like the monopolist, because there were only one producer, they could affect the price by their decision-making process. Again, here, the monopsony, that is, when there's only one buyer, the monopsony can affect the price. So when it makes decisions, it can affect the price in the market for the good. Okay, so then what I want to do today is I want to write out a model of monopsony, of the decision-making process of a firm that is a monopsony. Okay, so I want to write out a model of that. I want to show some of the components of that model, and I want to use the model to prove that, or to demonstrate how a monopsony will affect the price of a good. Okay, so that's the goal for today, and let's just get right to that. All right, so first, let me show just kind of a comparison. We're going to do a comparison like we did last time. Okay, we're going to do a comparison. We're going to have a competitive firm. Competitive firm. And then we will have a monopsony. Okay. All right, so let's imagine that we have a firm and it produces, you know what, I think what we're going to need to do is put this into some context. Okay, so let me describe, before I go into comparing the competitive firm with the monopsony, let me describe a context so we can get kind of an illustration to get this in our minds here. And I'm going to use a context that is common in developing countries, or especially in agriculture in developing countries. Okay. And it's going to be what we call contract farming. What we call contract farming. Okay, what is contract farming? Contract farming, and I'm just going to illustrate it here. Imagine that we have villages with many farmers. Okay, and all these circles here are farmers. All right, so we have a situation in which some region has many small-scale or smallholder farmers, and in this area of a developing country, we have a firm, okay, represented by this kind of tall building here. We have a firm, and this firm, what it does, let's say it produces sugar. That'd be a common example. Let's say this is a sugar company. They produce sugar and they sell it on the international market. Okay, so this is a firm. It produces sugar and it exports the sugar. All right, I actually visited a firm just like this in Tanzania. Okay, so here's a firm. It produces sugar. Now, how does it produce sugar? Well, the firm owns large tracts of land on which they grow sugarcane. Okay, they have large tracts of land on which they grow sugarcane. But then what they typically also do is that they will sign contract agreements with individual small-scale farmers in the area, and they will contract with these farmers to grow sugarcane as well. And so what happens is that this firm, it produces some sugarcane itself, and it also will buy sugarcane on contract from a bunch of small-scale farmers in the area. Okay, so they all produce sugarcane, and then they are contractually obligated to sell that sugarcane to the sugar company. Then the sugar company will process the sugarcane and export the sugar to sell for a profit. Okay, so now this company takes sugarcane as an input and it produces sugar as an output. Okay, so it's going to have some production function. Some production function where it produces sugar and it takes sugarcane as an input. Okay, so it takes sugarcane as an input, produces sugar, and then exports the sugar to generate revenue. Now, this sugarcane company, so what's very common is that this sugarcane company will be the only company that buys the produce from the farmers in their area. And so this company, this sugar company, acts as a monopsony. Or this could happen. It could be that we have a company, it's the only company that buys the sugarcane from the farmers in the area, and so it acts as a monopsony. It is the only buyer of sugarcane. Okay, so this this sugar company operates as a monopsony. It's the only buyer. It's the only buyer of sugarcane in the area. Okay, so then the question will be, well, what is the effect on the market price for sugarcane when there is only one buyer for the sugarcane? Okay, so we're going to use this. This is going to be our context. We're going to use this example to illustrate how a monopsony will affect prices. Okay, now we need to be clear. When the sugar company sells sugar, it will sell the sugar at a price. It'll sell the sugar at price P. The monopsony does not have control or does not have influence over the price at which it sells the sugar. It's selling the sugar on the international market, and so it does not affect the price of the sugar that it's selling. What it does affect is that it will, okay, so the monopsony will buy, so it buys sugarcane. It buys the sugarcane, okay? And so the monopsony can affect the price of the sugarcane. So let's say the price of the sugarcane, W. Of the sugarcane, okay. It can affect the price of the sugarcane. All right. It's not affecting the price at which it sells the sugar, but because it's the only buyer, it can affect the price at which they buy the sugarcane. Okay, so that's what we want to look at. We want to look at in what way does the monopsony influence the price of the sugarcane that it buys? Okay, now we can think of all kinds of other examples of monopsonies, but we're going to stick with this. Okay. So let me erase this picture and then we'll get right to it. All right. All right, so now let's imagine this scenario. Let's imagine this sugarcane scenario, okay? And let's think about a competitive market. So a competitive market would be there's a lot of sugarcane producers, and then there's also a lot of companies that buy that sugarcane, okay? And so in this competitive market where there's lots of companies buying the sugarcane, no one has a monopsony, and everyone are price takers. What does that look like? Well, the sugar company is going to choose how much sugarcane to purchase in order to maximize their profits, okay? And their profits will be the standard profit function. The price at which they sell sugar times the amount of sugar that they produce, okay? And the sugar that they produce is a function of how much sugarcane they buy, okay? Minus their cost. Their cost will be how much money they spend on sugarcane. So that'll be the price of sugarcane times the sugarcane. Okay. So this is kind of a standard profit function. Okay, standard profit function where we have revenue and we have cost. All right, and we notice that the price of the sugarcane is fixed. It's a constant. It's just a number. It doesn't change. The competitive firm has no ability to influence the price at which it purchases the sugarcane. It has no ability to affect it because there's lots of companies. There's lots of companies buying sugarcane. Okay. Now, let's compare that to what the problem would be for a monopsony. Now, a monopsony, they also are trying to maximize their profits. They're also choosing how much sugarcane to buy in order to maximize their profits. Okay? But now their profit functions will be a little bit different. Okay, first, they are going to have revenue. The revenue is going to be the price at which they sell sugar times how much sugar they produce. Okay, so they're still going to have revenue minus the cost. Right, and the revenue is the same, exact same revenue function. But now, looking at their cost, so what are their costs? Their cost is the price of the sugarcane times how much sugarcane they buy. But for the monopsony does not take the price of sugarcane as a given. It can influence the price of sugarcane. So instead it is WC, that is now the price of sugarcane times how much sugarcane they buy. So now here is the monopsony's profit function. We'll see that it is almost identical in the sense revenue is the same. So the revenue function is the same for the monopsonist. Here's the cost function, and it's very similar, except now the cost of the sugarcane is a function. The cost of the sugarcane is a function. What do I mean by that? That means that the price at which the sugarcane is purchased is a function of how much the monopsony purchases from the farmers. That means the monopsony can influence the price, and it influences the price by how much the monopsony chooses to buy from the producers. So how much the monopsony, the sugar company, chooses to buy from the sugarcane farmers. Okay, so that's the difference, and now that will influence the decision-making process of the monopsony relative to the competitive firm. But now before I go in and illustrate that, just like last lecture, let me go ahead and draw a graph, our supply and demand. Draw our supply and demand here, and try to get some intuition, some intuition as to what this WC is. Okay, let's get some intuition on what that is. Now let's say we have our supply and demand curve for sugarcane. All right, so supply and demand curve for sugarcane. We have our supply and we have our demand. Okay, so we have our demand function, supply function for the sugarcane. So now, in this context, actually first, let's just recognize that for both of these functions, for the demand function, for the supply function, these are both functions, price as a function of quantity. All right, both of these are price as a function of quantity. The supply curve is a function. The supply curve takes a quantity and it maps it to a price. So it is price as a function of quantity. That's what the supply curve is, and it's what the demand curve is. You can see that just by looking at the axes. You give it a quantity, and it gives you a price. So these are functions. These are functions that give you price as a function of quantity. Okay. All right, so now let's relate the supply and demand for sugarcane to the monopsony and try to get an idea of what this WC is. So WC is a function that gives you the price as a function of quantity. All right, so WC gives the price as a function of quantity. So now with our demand curve for sugarcane, let's replace it. The price of sugarcane is W. The quantity of sugarcane is C. So now we have it. Price is a function of quantity. Price is a function of sugarcane. Now the question is this price, this WC, does this come from the supply curve or the demand curve? If you remember when we were looking at monopolies, what happened with monopoly? The monopoly was the only producer, and it was interacting with consumers in the market. And we said that the monopoly could influence the price at which it sold. Just a reminder over here. We said that the monopoly could influence the price at which it sells its good. And now it could influence the price at which it sells its good because the firm will interact with the market demand for the good that it produces. And so we said that this P of Q, this price as a function of quantity, corresponded to the demand curve. Why is that? Because the monopoly is a firm that is producing and it's interacting with its consumers. And it has to take into consideration the demand that their consumers have for the product that it's producing. Okay, that's the problem that the monopoly faces. But for the monopsony is a single buyer. Okay, and the monopsony, it's interacting with a lot of producers of a good. So this sugar producer, the sugar company, is interacting with sugarcane producers. And the monopsony has influence over the market for sugarcane. That is influence over the price of sugarcane that it buys from all of the producers of sugarcane. So therefore, when we look at this WC is a representation of the supply curve. That is, this WC, the price of sugarcane, is the price at which the farmers who are growing the sugarcane, the price at which the farmers are willing to sell their sugarcane as a function of how much sugarcane the firm, the monopsony, is buying. Okay, so this WC captures the relationship between price and quantity that the farmers are producing. Okay, so it's the supply curve. This derives from the supply curve. Now let's try to get some intuition on that. Imagine this. The monopsony is buying all of the sugarcane in the market, right? They're the only buyer. They buy all of the sugarcane. So if the monopsony wants to buy more sugarcane, let's say it wants to buy a lot of sugarcane, that means farmers are going to need to produce more sugarcane. Well, in order to incentivize farmers, we can see this here on the graph, in order to incentivize farmers to produce higher quantities of sugarcane, the monopsony is going to need to pay a higher price. The price that the monopsony pays in order to get the farmers to produce more sugarcane has to be higher. Okay, so when the monopsony is considering how much sugarcane that it should buy as an input for its production of sugar, it needs to take into consideration the fact that the quantity that it buys will affect the price that it needs to pay to the farmers in order to produce it. Okay, so this WC derives from the supply curve of the farmers. Okay, so this is the farmers output supply function. Okay. So this WC, this price, what it does is it's capturing the relationship between the monopsony and the farmers. If the monopsony is the only buyer, then its choice of how much to purchase from the farmers is going to affect the price that it has to pay the farmers. The farmers, if the monopsony wants to buy C star quantity of sugarcane, the only way it can get C star quantity of sugarcane is if they pay the producers W star in order to get C star. They have to pay this. Why? Well, it's determined by the farmer's output supply function. Okay, so that's the background. That's what this WC is. That'll be important later, but let's come back to it. All right, so we're going to come back to that later. Store that in your memory, okay? That this WC corresponds to the output supply function of the farmers from which the monopsony is buying the sugarcane. All right. Now, with that said, what I want to do now is I want to demonstrate to you and prove that the monopsony is going to be able to affect the price, and I want to show what effect that the monopsony has on the price. So let's do that. To do that, what we're going to do is I want to solve both of these. I want to find the first order conditions for both the competitive firm and the monopsony, and then compare them. Okay, so let's do it. First, let's start with the competitive firm. First order conditions. Taking the derivative with respect to C. All right, so we have price times S star. Again, I'm going to suppress the C. Minus W equals 0. All right, W is the price. W is the price at which they will buy the sugarcane. All right, and we can remember here, okay, so this is the marginal benefit or the marginal revenue, we say marginal revenue. All right, here's the marginal cost. All right, C star, that is the amount of sugarcane they buy, solves this expression. You set the marginal benefit equal to the marginal cost. I'll do it the opposite way here though. Marginal cost equals marginal benefit. Okay, so C star, so the firm, the competitive firm, will choose the quantity of sugarcane to purchase, C star, such that it solves this expression. Okay, marginal benefit equals marginal cost. Now this expression also communicates to me what the price is going to be. Right, so we can see that the price is going to be equal to the marginal benefit, okay? The price is going to be equal to the marginal benefit of an additional unit of sugarcane. All right, this will be important. We'll relate this. We will relate this later. Okay. All right, so now let's do the same thing over here. Take the derivative. The marginal revenue, marginal benefit is the same, but now the marginal cost is a little bit different. So let's do it. We have to use the chain rule. Derivative of the first term times the second, W prime times C, plus, although it's a minus because it's a negative here, the derivative of the second terms times the first, which will just be W, equals 0. Okay, and so again, we will have marginal benefit, and then we will have the marginal cost. All right, so let's set those equal to each other. So I'll have the marginal cost on the left-hand side. Okay, so now let's just take a careful look at this. The marginal benefit is the same as we had before, as we had with the competitive firm. The price, okay, but the marginal cost is different. Now I want to compare these two in just a moment, but before I do that, let me just kind of think again about the decision-making process of the firm. Whoops. Okay, let's get that back. Let's look at this condition and think about how it influences the decision-making process of the monopsonist firm. So the monopsonist is choosing how much sugarcane to purchase. Okay, and it makes that decision by equating the marginal benefit and the marginal cost. Typical rational choice theory. Okay, what's the marginal benefit? Well, the marginal benefit is the additional revenue that they will generate by having more sugarcane inputs. If you increase the amount of sugarcane, then the amount that you produce will go up. It'll go up by S prime. and then you'll be able to sell it at price P for additional revenue. So this is the additional revenue that the firm gets if it adds one more unit of sugarcane. Okay. Now, here's the marginal cost. What's the marginal cost? Well, every additional unit of the sugarcane is going to cost the firm whatever it pays, so it'll cost the firm the price of that additional unit of sugarcane. All right, that's the same as over here. So far, everything's the same as with the competitive firm. But now there's an additional thing to take into consideration. The monopsonist firm also needs to take into consideration that if it buys an additional unit of sugarcane, it needs to take into consideration the way in which that additional unit of sugarcane will affect the price. And that's what this is. What is W prime? W prime is the change in the price given a change in the quantity of sugarcane purchased. So this term here captures the effect of the monopsonist firm's decision on the price of the sugarcane. Okay, so this just captures mathematically, that the monopsony takes into considers the price of the good it buys. Okay, now, with that said, let's relate the monopsonist to the competitive firm, and let's see what the effect of the monopsony has on the price. So in order to do that, let's solve this condition for W, just like we did over here, and we can compare them. W equals P S prime minus W prime C. All right, now let's just make this really clear. I'm going to write them right over top of each other. So for the competitive firm, price, let's do it this way. The price for the competitive firm equals P S prime. The price for the monopsony firm is P S prime minus W prime C. Okay, now it's very clear to see that this part of the equations are the same. So that means if the monopsony was not looking at the effect of their decision on the price, then the monopsony and the competitive firm would both face the same price. All right, they would be the same because they both would be equal to the marginal benefit. But that's not the case. The monopsony also has to consider the effect of its input decision on the price of the input. So now we want to know, well, is the competitive price, is it greater than, less than, or equal to the monopsony price? Well, we know it's not equal to, it just said that. So is it less than the monopsony price, or is it greater than the monopsony price? All right, so let's compare. Now, if this term, let's get a different color out. If this term is, okay, first let's sign this. Is this term positive or negative? Well, the price is positive. Don't have a negative price. What about S prime? S prime is the change in sugar production given a 1 unit increase in the amount of sugarcane. Well, if we increase inputs, we'll increase outputs, so this is positive. That means that the marginal benefit is positive. Okay, so that's a positive term. Now, what about this one? If this term is positive, that means you have a positive minus a positive, so then the price for the monopsony would be smaller. The price for the monopsony would be smaller than the price for the competitive firm. Okay? If this is negative, then you would have a negative you have minus a negative, which would become a positive, and in that case, the monopsony price would be bigger. Okay, so then let's figure out what is it. Well, first, let's just do each part. Sugarcane. Is the amount of sugarcane that the monopsony purchases, is that a positive or a negative? Well, it has to be positive. The sugar company can't buy negative sugarcane from the farmers, so that's easy. What it really comes down to is this one. What's the sign of W prime? Well, let's remind ourselves what W prime is. It's the change in the price given a change in the quantity that the monopsony will purchase from the farmers. So now, is it positive or is it negative? Well, let's remember our supply and demand curve. Supply, demand. Supply and demand are both functions. They are both price as a function of sugarcane. Question is, are we dealing with the demand curve or are we dealing with the supply curve? Well, demand curves come from consumers, supply curves come from producers. The monopsony, the sugar company, is buying sugarcane from producers of sugarcane, so we are dealing with the supply curve. That means we can know the slope. As the quantity of sugarcane that the monopsony buys goes up, that is, as C goes up, the price will go up because the supply curve is upward sloping. So that means W prime is positive. All right, so if W prime is positive, we have a positive times a positive. This whole term is a positive. So I have a positive number minus another positive number. That implies that the monopsony price will be lower. Whoops, opposite. The monopsony price will be lower than the competitive price. Okay, so when we have a monopsony, the monopsony is able to influence the price, and they will be able to lower the price. They will be able to lower the price relative to a competitive firm. And what does that do? Well, that allows the monopsony to achieve higher profits, but it does so at the expense of farmers who make lower profits on their sugarcane that they produce. And it results in deadweight loss. That means it results in the market not achieving all of the possible mutually beneficial voluntary trades that it would if it were in a competitive market where the monopsony doesn't have power over the prices. Okay, so that's it for monopsony. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in class. Have a great day.